Her husband fled the delivery room while she was giving birth to twins, and the man who replaced him was the city's most dangerous mafia boss. He didn't come to help. He came to collect a debt. But what happened next changed everything. If you love stories of betrayal, power, and love emerging from the shadows, hit like now and comment your city name below so I know how far this story has come. Don't miss a single part. Follow it to the end. I'm not done. The contraction hit Evelyn Carter like something structural had snapped inside her body. Not a cramp, not the rolling pressure the nurses had described during those prenatal classes she and Gavin had attended 6 months ago, back when she still believed their life together was real. This was deeper, a grinding tectonic shift that started in her lower spine and wrapped around her abdomen like a steel cable being winched tight by something mechanical and merciless. She gripped the bed rail with both hands and breathed through her teeth and told herself it would pass. It didn't pass. The second contraction came 40 seconds after the first. Gavin. Her voice was barely above a whisper, still trying to be composed, still trying not to become the kind of woman who screamed in a hospital. Gavin, I need you to call the nurse. He was standing near the window, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. He'd been on that call for 11 minutes. She knew because she'd been watching the clock above the door, the institutional white clock with the red second hand that had become the most important object in the room. Watching it between contractions, counting the intervals, trying to calculate how quickly her body was accelerating toward a point she couldn't control. Gavin. He turned his head slightly but didn't look at her. His jaw was tight, the kind of tight that meant something was wrong on the other end of that call. Not wrong like a business inconvenience, but wrong like something existential, something that had collapsed the floor beneath a man who was supposed to be standing on solid ground. Evelyn had seen that jaw before, 3 times in the past year. She'd chalked it up to work stress, to the pressure of his import consulting firm, to the particular strain men carried when money moved in ways they couldn't fully control. She had been generous in her interpretations. She'd been a fool. Hey, I have to call you back. Gavin's voice was clipped, too quiet. He pulled the phone from his ear and turned fully toward her, and for a split second, one fractured, clarifying second, she saw something in his face that she had never seen there before. Fear. Raw and absolute and poorly hidden. Then the mask came back up, and he crossed the room and squeezed her hand with the mechanical tenderness of a man performing a gesture he'd rehearsed. You're doing great, he said. I'm dilated to 8 centimeters, and my contractions are 40 seconds apart, she said flatly. I'm not doing great. I need the nurse, and I need you to put your phone away. Right, yeah. He pressed the call button on the rail. I'll get her. The nurse came. Her name was Patricia, a compact woman in her mid-50s with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had delivered enough panic to know the difference between genuine emergency and ordinary fear. She checked the fetal monitors, read the numbers, and spoke to Evelyn with the kind of calm that could only come from professional discipline. You're moving fast, Patricia said. These 2 want to come tonight. Tell them to wait, Evelyn said, and the nurse laughed, and for a moment it felt almost manageable. Then the phone in Gavin's pocket buzzed again. He stepped back from the bed, just a single step, just far enough to angle his body slightly away, and Evelyn watched him check the screen. Whatever he saw there made the color drain from his face so completely and so fast that she thought for a moment he was going to faint. His hand tightened on the phone. His eyes went to the door. Gavin? Her voice had changed, not the soft voice she'd been using, the other one. The voice she used when she needed him to look at her and actually see her. What is happening with you right now? Nothing? He didn't look at her. It's nothing. Work thing. Your face just turned completely white. Evelyn, I'm fine. You're not fine. Look at me. He looked at her. And that was when she knew. Not intellectually, not with the part of her brain that could organize suspicions into arguments, but in the part of her body that had been carrying 2 human lives for 38 weeks and had developed in that time a profound sensitivity to things that were about to go catastrophically wrong. She knew the way an animal knows weather. She felt it in her sternum. Something was coming. He kissed her forehead. His lips were cold. I'll be right back, he said. I just need to make one quick call. 5 minutes. Gavin, I'm in active labor. 5 minutes. He was already at the door, already half gone, the way she would understand later that he had always been half gone, the physical version of him merely the last thing to catch up with the truth. I'll be right back. I promise. He walked out. The door swung closed behind him with a soft, hydraulic hiss. Patricia was watching the fetal monitors with professional detachment and said nothing. Evelyn stared at the door. Another contraction came, worse than the previous two, and she pressed her back into the mattress and breathed and counted and told herself he would come back through that door in 5 minutes the way he'd said. Men said 5 minutes. Sometimes they meant it. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Patricia had paged the OB. A second nurse had appeared. The room was filling with the quiet, urgent choreography of a delivery that wasn't going to wait for anyone, and Evelyn was at its center, gripping the rail and doing the work her body demanded, and still the door at the end of the room did not open with Gavin on the other side of it. 20 minutes. Is there someone else we can call? Patricia asked, not unkindly. He said he'd be right back. I know what he said. The nurse held her gaze. Is there someone else? There wasn't. Her mother was in Phoenix and wouldn't answer until morning. She and Gavin had moved to the city 3 years ago for his work, and the life she'd built here was built around him, around his schedule, his contacts, his version of their story. She had friends, but not the kind you called at midnight when you were 8 centimeters dilated and your husband had vanished from the delivery room. She had acquaintances. She had people who sent birthday texts. She had no one. No, Evelyn said. There's no one else. She said it, and then a contraction hit that made the previous ones feel gentle, and she stopped thinking about Gavin or Phoenix or the door and focused entirely on the biological imperative of survival, because that was what remained when everything else was stripped away. You breathe, you push, you keep yourself alive for the people who are not yet in the world but are coming whether anyone is ready or not. The OB arrived. Dr. Miriam Okafor, steady-handed and direct, who assessed the situation in under 60 seconds and began preparing for delivery with the focused efficiency of someone who had presided over enough of these moments to understand that the emotional circumstances of the parents were secondary to the physical circumstances of the children. Where's Mr. Carter? Dr. Okafor asked, not to anyone in particular. He stepped out, Patricia said. He needs to come back in. We can't reach him. A pause, just a fraction of one. Then, all right. Evelyn, look at me. You're going to do this. Your body knows what to do. I'm going to be here every second, okay? Okay, Evelyn said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Okay. Dr. Okafor moved. The team moved. The room reconfigured around the singular purpose of bringing 2 lives into the world, and Evelyn Carter, abandoned by the man who had promised to be there, bore down and did what was required of her. She was fully dilated. The first twin was positioned correctly. They were moving. That was when the commotion started in the hallway. It was not loud at first. A raised voice, the sound of a security desk conversation escalating past its normal register, the clipped radio burst of a hospital security officer. Patricia glanced toward the door. The second nurse moved to it and peered through the narrow window above the handle, and whatever she saw there made her go very still in a way that communicated something pre-verbal and immediate. Dr. Okafor, the second nurse said, I'm a little busy right now. There are men in the hallway. A beat. Dr. Okafor did not look up from her work. There are always men in the hallway. Not like this. The door opened. Not violently. That was the thing that would stay with Evelyn longest about that moment. It opened the way doors opened by men who had never once had to force their way into a room, who moved through the world with the certainty that rooms opened for them as a matter of course, the way gravity worked and weather happened. It opened cleanly and without hesitation, and the man who came through it filled the frame in a way that had nothing to do with physical size, though he was tall, well over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, dressed in a dark suit that had been cut precisely to his measurements, and had probably cost more than 2 months of Gavin's salary. He was perhaps 45. Black hair, silver at the temples. A face that had been arranged by genetics into something that would have been called handsome in another context. Clean lines, sharp jaw, eyes so dark they read as black under the fluorescent light. but which, in this context, read as something more precise than handsome, something calibrated, the kind of face that had learned to show exactly what it wanted to show and nothing else. Behind him, two men in similar suits remained in the hallway. A third stepped just inside the door and stood with his hands loose at his sides in the posture of someone trained to occupy space efficiently. Dr. Okafor looked up. "Sir," she said with the particular authority of a physician who had stopped tolerating nonsense sometime around her residency. "You cannot be in here. This is an active delivery room." "I can see that." The man's voice was accented, Italian, refined, the English of someone who had learned the language at a high level and used it primarily in rooms where precision mattered. He looked at Evelyn with an expression that was difficult to read. Not cold, not warm. Something in between, something that held both possibilities without committing to either. "I apologize for the intrusion, Dr. Okafor, and I need you to leave immediately." "I will leave when I have said what I need to say." He moved one step further into the room. The man near the door did not move. "My name is Lucian Moretti. I'm looking for Gavin Carter." His eyes moved back to Evelyn. "I believe this is his wife." Evelyn looked at this man standing in her delivery room in a $1,000 suit with armed men behind him while she lay in a hospital gown at 9 centimeters dilated, and she thought, "I don't know who you are, but you are the thing Gavin ran from." "He's not here," she said. "I know he's not here." Lucian Moretti stepped closer, not threatening, or rather threatening in the way that all proximity was threatening when you were in the position she was in, when you were horizontal and in pain and stripped of every ordinary defense. "He left approximately 22 minutes ago through the emergency stairwell on the north side of this building. He had a bag." A pause. "He was not coming back." The words landed in a specific place in her chest. Not a surprise, not exactly. Her body had known this was the truth since the door swung closed behind him, but hearing it spoken aloud in clinical English by a stranger was a different category of experience. It was the difference between suspecting your house was on fire and watching someone hand you the match. "I don't know where he went," she said. "That's all right." He looked at her steadily. "That's not why I'm here." Another contraction came, and Evelyn's body doubled into it before she could stop it, and she heard herself make a sound that she would have been embarrassed by in any other circumstance. Dr. Okafor moved with purpose, and Patricia moved with her, and for a moment the room was entirely about the biological fact of what was happening. The world narrowed to breath and pressure, and the fierce animal need to survive. When it passed, she looked up, and Lucian Moretti was still there. He had not moved. He had not flinched. Most people flinched. "What do you want?" she managed. He reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and withdrew a folded document. He didn't unfold it. He held it at his side, and something about the controlled deliberateness of that gesture, the choice not to wave it in her face, not to use it as a weapon in the way documents were so often used as weapons, told her more about this man than anything he had said. "Your husband borrowed money from my organization," he said. "A significant amount. Over the course of 4 years, he used our capital to fund various ventures, some legal, some not. He made promises about repayment timelines that he did not keep. He made other promises as well." He paused. 3 months ago, when it became clear that he could not cover what he owed, he came to us with an alternative arrangement. "What kind of arrangement?" She already knew she didn't want to hear this. "He signed a collateral agreement." Lucian looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes. "You and your children." The room was very quiet except for the rhythmic pulse of the fetal monitors and the particular hum of hospital equipment doing its work. "That's not legal," Dr. Okafor said sharply. "You cannot use a human being as collateral." No," Lucian agreed without breaking eye contact with Evelyn. "You cannot. Which is one of the reasons I am here tonight." He folded the document back and returned it to his pocket. "The other reason is that Gavin Carter has disappeared with property that belongs to my organization, and his disappearance has created a situation that requires resolution." "What does that mean for her?" Patricia asked. She had moved slightly, positioning herself between the bed and this man in a gesture that Evelyn recognized as protective and also probably futile. It means that certain parties not affiliated with my organization, are aware of the collateral document and believe they have a claim on Mrs. Carter and her children. They are acting on that belief tonight. He paused. They are not as selective as I am about the methods they use to collect. Evelyn's heart rate spiked. The monitor above her head registered it. There are people coming here? She said. They are already in the building, he said. 2 floors down. My men are managing the situation, but the window is narrow and it will not stay manageable if we remain here. He looked at Dr. Okafor. How long until delivery? That is none of your... How long? The question was not raised in volume, but it changed register, became something that expected an answer the way a wall expects to be a wall. Dr. Okafor met his gaze with steel and then looked at her monitors. The first twin could come in 20 minutes, the second shortly after. Then we have a problem. He said it with the matter-of-fact quality of a man updating a logistics calculation. Delivering her here is not safe. Moving her is also not safe, given her condition. He looked around the room, assessing it, calculating something. We stay. I beg your pardon? Dr. Okafor said. We stay. My men will secure this floor. You will deliver the children. When it's done, we move. He looked at Evelyn. I give you my word that nothing will happen to you in this room. No harm will come to you or your children tonight. You just told me you came here to collect a debt, Evelyn said. Why would I believe anything you say? He looked at her for a long moment. Because I am still here, he said, and your husband is not. There was nothing she could say to that. It was the most honest sentence anyone had spoken to her in months. The next 40 minutes were the most surreal of Evelyn Carter's life, which was saying something given how the evening had gone. Lucien Moretti positioned himself at the far wall of the room, not in the way, not interfering, simply present in the manner of a man who had decided a thing and was committed to it. His associate near the door communicated via earpiece in low Italian, the cadence of those communications punctuated twice by what sounded distantly like shouting from somewhere below them in the building. Evelyn heard it. She registered it and then set it aside because she did not have the capacity to address it. Her body had taken control in a way that was total and non-negotiable, and what remained of her conscious decision-making was focused entirely on the instructions coming from Dr. Okafor, on Patricia's hand steady in hers, on the monitors measuring 2 small heartbeats fighting to stay strong and regular while the world outside this room did whatever it was going to do. The first twin came at 11:47 p.m. A boy, 6 pounds, 2 ounces. He announced himself to the world with a cry so fierce and indignant that Patricia laughed out loud, and even Dr. Okafor permitted herself a small, unguarded smile. Evelyn heard the cry and felt something break open in her chest. Not break like damage, but break like a seal releasing, like something that had been compressed and held under pressure for 9 months, suddenly finding room to expand. He's perfect, Patricia said, and held him up briefly before the second team moved in, because there was no time to rest, because the second twin had her own schedule and was not inclined to wait. In the moment between twins, that strange suspended minute when the room was reorganizing itself around the next arrival, Evelyn turned her head toward the wall where Lucien Moretti stood. He was looking at the boy, not at her, at the child in Patricia's hands, and his face had done something that she doubted he was aware of. The controlled, calibrated surface had softened in a way that wasn't deliberate, the way faces sometimes do in the presence of something that cuts through everything a person has built to protect themselves. He caught her looking, his face reset. But she had seen it. The second twin came 18 minutes later. A girl, 5 pounds, 14 ounces. She did not cry immediately, and those 4 seconds of silence were the worst 4 seconds of Evelyn's life before the sound came. Smaller than her brothers, but no less fierce, no less alive, no less insistent on being heard. Both healthy, Dr. Okafor said, and her voice carried the particular kind of satisfaction that earned. Both strong. Evelyn's body gave out completely. Not in a dangerous way, in the way that bodies give out when they have done the impossible thing they were asked to do and have nothing left to prove. She lay back against the mattress and breathed and felt the specific quality of an exhaustion, so complete it was almost peaceful. Lucian Moretti was at the door now, speaking quietly with his associate. More Italian. She caught none of it. He turned back to the room, and his expression had returned to the unreadable default. "We need to move within the hour," he said. Dr. Okafor turned on him. "These children were born 20 minutes ago. Their mother is not going anywhere." The men downstairs have been contained, but their organization knows this location. They will send more. He wasn't arguing. He was explaining the way someone explains a weather event, not as something he had caused, but as something that was simply happening and required adaptation. "I have a vehicle equipped with medical support. I have a physician on staff at my estate. She needs to be moved. She needs to rest. She can rest somewhere that won't kill her." The room fell quiet. Evelyn looked at the ceiling. She thought about the door swinging closed behind Gavin. She thought about the collateral document in Lucien Moretti's breast pocket, her name on it, her children's lives attached to a debt she'd never known existed. She thought about what waited for her if she went with this man, and she thought about what waited for her if she stayed. "What happens when we get to your estate?" she asked. Lucien turned toward her. "You recover," he said. "Your children are cared for. We discuss the situation when you are capable of having that discussion, not before." "And the debt?" A pause. Brief. "The debt is complicated by factors that are not your fault. That is also something we discuss later. I want your word that my children are not part of whatever this is." He looked at her for a long moment, the dark eyes steady, the jaw exactly as controlled as it hadn't been in every moment since he walked through the door. "They were never part of it," he said. "What your husband did with their names is something he will answer for, not them." She held his gaze. She was running on the last vapor of everything, physical, emotional, rational, and she had no good options, and she knew it. And she thought about the sound of shouting 2 floors below them, and she thought about her son's fierce cry and her daughter's stubborn 4 seconds of silence, and she thought, "I will not let them become casualties of a war someone else started." "Okay," she said. "We go." Dr. Okafor looked like she wanted to object further, but something in Evelyn's face stopped her. Maybe she recognized the particular expression of a woman who has run out of choices and chosen the least catastrophic available one. Maybe she just understood that this decision had already been made. They moved Evelyn and the twins with a speed and efficiency that suggested Lucian Moretti had prepared for this contingency. His vehicle, a large black SUV with medical-grade modifications to the rear compartment, an IV stand braced to the interior wall, was waiting in the hospital's service entrance, a space that had been cleared by methods Evelyn didn't ask about. Patricia came with her to the elevator, carrying the girl while Lucien's associate carried monitoring equipment. At the elevator door, Patricia pressed something into Evelyn's free hand, a hospital card with her personal cell number written on the back. "You call me," Patricia said. "Anytime. If anything happens, you call." Evelyn looked at this woman she'd known for 4 hours who had held her hand while her husband was gone, and her world was dismantling itself around her. "Thank you," she said. It wasn't enough. It was all she had. The elevator doors closed. In the service corridor, with her son in her arms and her daughter being carried 3 feet away, and armed men she didn't know moving with practiced purpose around her, Evelyn Carter took stock of what she had. 2 living children, her own living body, a nurse's phone number on a card, and an Italian crime lord who had stayed in a hospital delivery room through an armed incursion because, why? Because it was in his interest? Because he wanted his collateral alive? Because for one unguarded moment beside a screaming newborn, his face had done something human? She didn't know. The SUV doors opened. Cold night air hit her face. She stepped out into it, her legs unsteady, her body still raw from everything it had just endured. And she moved toward the vehicle because there was nowhere else to go. Lucien was beside her before she reached the door. Not grabbing, not guiding, just present, one hand at the edge of her elbow, in a way that was there if she needed it, and absent if she didn't. She didn't look at him. She got into the vehicle and settled against the reclined rear seat and took her son back from the medical assistant who had transferred him while she boarded and pulled both children close against her chest and closed her eyes. The doors sealed shut. The SUV moved. In the dark behind her eyelids, Evelyn thought about the document in Lucien Moretti's pocket. Her name. Her children. The handwriting she hadn't seen but could imagine. Gavin's slanted, confident script. The same handwriting on their marriage certificate 5 years ago. The same hand that had signed away his family to save himself. She thought about the collateral agreement, and she thought about the rival organization still somewhere in that hospital, still believing they had a claim. She thought about what it meant to owe a debt to a man like Lucien Moretti, and what he would eventually ask for in return. The city moved past the tinted windows in streaks of orange and white light. Her daughter made a small sound in the dark. Her son's weight against her chest was the realest thing in the world. Somewhere ahead, behind walls she hadn't seen yet, behind gates that would close behind her and might not open again on her terms, a life was waiting that she hadn't chosen and couldn't yet see the shape of. And somewhere in this city, or beyond it, Gavin Carter was running. He thought he had gotten away clean. He was wrong. The estate appeared through the tinted glass like something from a different century. Stone walls, iron gates, a private road flanked by oaks that had been planted before anyone currently living had been born. It was not ostentatious the way new money was ostentatious. It was old and heavy and certain of itself, the way only things built to last through serious trouble ever were. The gates opened before the SUV slowed. Someone had been watching. Evelyn registered none of it with any real depth of attention. She was running on a biological minimum, the part of a person that stays functional after everything else is shut down, the survival floor. Her arms were around both children. Her back was against the reclined seat. The IV drip in her left arm was doing something that had taken the worst edge off the physical pain, and she was grateful for that in a muted, distant way, the way you're grateful for small things when large things are still too overwhelming to process. The vehicle stopped. Doors opened. People moved with purpose around her. A woman was waiting at the entrance to the main house, perhaps 60, compact, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone who gave instructions and expected them to be followed. She introduced herself as Dr. Renata Voss, and she did not introduce herself warmly. She introduced herself the way a specialist introduces herself at the start of an assessment. "Let me see them," Dr. Voss said, not to Evelyn, but about the children. And it was only Lucien's slight nod from somewhere behind Evelyn that made the possessive alarm in her chest stand down enough to let the woman approach. Dr. Voss examined both twins with practiced efficiency. She checked the boy's airways, his color, his reflex response. She weighed them on a portable scale that had been prepared in waiting. She checked temperatures, blood oxygen, the quality of the cord clamps. She did all of this with the neutral thoroughness of someone for whom newborns were a medical category rather than an emotional event, and she reported her findings aloud as she went. Both within acceptable parameters. The girl is slightly underweight for gestational age, but within safe range. The boy is stronger. Neither shows signs of respiratory distress. She straightened and looked at Evelyn. "You did well, considering." "Considering," Evelyn repeated. "Considering the circumstances of the delivery, field conditions, essentially." Dr. Voss said it without inflection. "You need fluids, rest, and monitoring for the next 12 hours. I'll examine you fully once you're settled." They brought her to a room on the second floor. It was large and quiet with high ceilings and windows that looked out over the grounds. The furniture was dark wood and old fabric. Nothing decorative, everything functional and solid. A bassinet had been set up near the bed, 2 of them side by side. Someone had thought to do that before they arrived. Evelyn noticed that detail and filed it somewhere. She settled into the bed and let Dr. Voss finish her assessment and accepted the medications offered without asking too many questions, because she did not have the cognitive capacity for too many questions, because her children were beside her and breathing, and that was what mattered tonight. Everything else was tomorrow's problem. She was asleep within minutes. She woke at 5 in the morning to her son's hunger cry and the disorienting vertigo of not knowing where she was for approximately 4 seconds, and then she knew, and the weight of it settled on her chest like something physical. She lay still for a moment with that weight, and then she got up and went to the bassinets because there was work to do, regardless of where she was or how she'd gotten there. She fed them in the dark, one after the other, and sat in the silence of a house that was large enough to absorb all its own sounds, and she thought about Gavin, not with love. She was surprised to discover that the love was already gone, not fading, not wounded, but simply absent, burned off by what had happened in that hospital room the way fog burns off in direct heat. What was left in its place was something colder and more precise. Calculation. The kind of thinking that happens when sentiment has been removed from the equation and only the facts remain. Fact. Gavin had borrowed money from a criminal organization. Fact. He had done this over 4 years. Fact. She had not known. Fact. He had signed documents using her name and the names of children who hadn't yet been born. Fact. He had run. She sat with those facts in the dark of a stranger's house and let them arrange themselves into the shape they were actually in, not the shape she would have preferred them to be in, and when the shape was clear, she felt something settle in her that she would not have called peace, but might have called readiness. A door had closed behind her. Whatever came next, she was going to face it standing. At 7 in the morning, a woman named Kara knocked on the door, young, dark-haired, with the guarded efficiency of someone who had learned to be useful without drawing attention. She brought food, formula for supplemental feeding, clean clothing, and roughly Evelyn's size. She set everything down and moved to leave without being asked to stay. "Wait," Evelyn said. Kara stopped. "What is this place?" "Mr. Moretti's estate. Flat, factual. How many people live here?" "Staff, security, Mr. Moretti." A pause. "And now you. And now me," Evelyn said. Kara left. Evelyn ate because she needed to. She changed because she needed to. She checked both children, spoke to them in the low, half-senseless murmur that newborns required, told them things were going to be fine in a tone that was less certainty than intention. Then she dressed herself in borrowed clothes that fit well enough and sat on the edge of the bed and waited, because she had a feeling she wouldn't have to wait long. She was right. Lucien Moretti knocked at 8:15. He opened the door only when she said he could. He was in a different suit from the night before, charcoal, impeccably fitted, and he carried 2 cups of coffee, one of which he set on the table near the door, as if he wasn't sure he'd be invited far enough into the room to hand it to her directly. She looked at him across that distance. "Sit down," she said. "We're going to talk." Something shifted in his face, not quite surprise, but an acknowledgement of something unexpected. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat. He was still holding his own coffee. He didn't drink from it. "Tell me everything," she said. Not the version you'd tell someone you're trying to manage, the actual version. He considered her for a moment with those dark eyes that gave away less than most people's silences. "Your husband first contacted my organization 4 years ago," he said. "He was referred by a business associate who had used our financial services. We operate, among other things, as a private lending entity for individuals who cannot secure capital through conventional means, or who prefer discretion about the sources of that capital." He paused. "The first loan was $400,000. He repaid it. The second was larger. He repaid most of it. By the third, he had stopped repaying. How much does he owe?" "At current calculation, including accrued interest and the penalties applied when he missed agreed-upon milestones, approximately $7.2 million. Evelyn looked at the ceiling. $7.2 million. The number didn't even feel real. It was the kind of number that belonged to a different category of human activity than anything she had been living. She thought about their apartment in the city, their reliable car, his imported suits and his business lunches, and the way he'd always said they were comfortable without ever giving her specific numbers. Comfortable. The word now had the specific sourness of a lie she'd swallowed 100 times without noticing the taste. "And the collateral agreement," she said. "He actually did that." "Yes." "He signed my name." "He forged your signature, technically. We have since confirmed this through handwriting analysis. The legal validity of the document is—" He paused with something that might have been the ghost of irony. "Limited. But someone else thinks it's valid. A man named Victor Slade. He leads an organization based in the Northeast that operates in competition with mine. He became aware of the collateral agreement through a leak, Someone in my organization who was working with him. A muscle shifted in his jaw. That has been addressed. What does Slade want? He wants leverage over me. Taking the children, would provide that leverage. It would also allow him to claim the debt recovery as a way of establishing his organization's reach into territory I control. He said it cleanly, without drama, as if he were discussing a business dispute, which she supposed he was. He sent the men to the hospital last night. And you sent your men to stop them? Yes. Why? She said it directly, watching his face. If the document has limited legal validity, if I'm not a legitimate asset, if Gavin has already run, why not just let Slade take me and call it a business write-off? Why stay in that delivery room? Why bring me here? The silence between them was specific, not empty, full of whatever he was deciding about. Because what your husband did was a violation of protocols that exist for a reason, he said, finally. We do not take civilians. We do not involve families. Gavin Carter involved you without your knowledge or consent. That makes the situation an anomaly that requires correction, not exploitation. That's a principle. Yes. You're a crime lord with principles. I'm a man who has built something that functions because it has rules, he said. Rules that Gavin Carter broke by using your name. If I permit his violation to become your consequence, I am endorsing what he did. I don't endorse it. She studied him. He didn't look away. Most people looked away eventually under sustained attention. He didn't. Where's Gavin now? She asked. We don't know. He had preparation for his disappearance that suggests planning, false documents, accounts in jurisdictions with limited extradition agreements. He has been building his exit for at least 6 months. Another pause. He knew he was out of time. The disappearance was planned before last night. Before the twins were born. Yes. She absorbed that. He had known he was leaving before they were born. He had been preparing to abandon her while she'd been in prenatal classes and painting the nursery they'd never use. He had sat across from her at dinner and asked how she was feeling and counted the weeks and told her everything was fine while he was already halfway out the door. Okay, she said. Her voice was level. She was mildly amazed by how level it was. What happens now? To me? To them? You remain here until the situation with Slade is resolved. You are under my protection. Your children are under my protection. No harm will come to you in my house. How long? I don't know. Weeks, possibly. Slade is not a man who accepts defeat quietly. He will make additional moves before he accepts that this particular play is done. She looked at the bassinet where her son had just fallen back to sleep, his face slack and perfect and entirely ignorant of everything that surrounded him. I need things, she said, for the children, for myself. I need to make phone calls. There are people who will be worried. My mother, Kara, will assist with whatever you need. Phone calls can be arranged through secure lines. We'll need to be careful about what you share regarding your location. He stood. I would ask that you stay on the second floor for the next 24 hours while my security team completes their reassessment of perimeter protocols. You're asking, not telling. He looked at her. Yes. She held his gaze for another moment and then nodded once. He picked up his coffee from the table by the door, still hadn't drunk from it, and moved to leave. Moretti, she said. He turned. The person in your organization who leaked the information to Slade. The one you said has been addressed. She kept her eyes on his face. What does addressed mean? He held the question for a beat. It means it won't happen again, he said, and left. She sat with that answer and didn't push it, because she already knew what it meant, and pushing it would only be a way of making herself feel better about the situation she was in. And she didn't need to feel better. She needed to be clear about where she was. She was in the house of a man who had people killed, who had built an empire on money and coercion and the particular authority that came from being willing to do things ordinary people wouldn't. She was there because her husband had stolen from that man and run, and she was the thing left behind, and the distinction between guest and collateral was currently defined only by one man's stated principles. She was going to need to pay very close attention. The first 3 days had a strange texture, the suspended, unreal quality of a life temporarily removed from its normal context, like being placed in a waiting room that was too comfortable to be a waiting room and too unfamiliar to be home. Evelyn moved through the routines of new motherhood in that large, quiet house, feeding and sleeping and the endless small urgencies of two newborns who had no interest in coordinating their schedules. And the house organized itself around those routines with an efficiency that should have felt intrusive but mostly just felt like infrastructure. Kara was there when she needed things. Dr. Voss appeared morning and evening to check the twins' weights and Evelyn's recovery with the same neutral thoroughness she'd shown on the first night. The security personnel who moved through the hallways and grounds were unobtrusive in the specific way that well-trained men were unobtrusive, present enough to be functional, invisible enough not to create constant anxiety. She named the twins on the second day. She'd had names picked for months, names she and Gavin had discussed and agreed on in what felt now like a different life. She used them anyway, because they were her choices too, and she was done letting Gavin Carter's choices contaminate hers. The boy she named Marco, the girl she named Isla. She told no one this until she told Lucien on the fourth evening, when he appeared at the door of the sitting room that adjoined her suite, knocked, waited, entered when she told him to, and stood with that particular controlled stillness that she was beginning to understand was not coldness, but something closer to discipline. A man who had spent so long managing what his face and body communicated that the management had become the default. "How are they?" he asked. It was the question he asked every evening. She had begun to notice that he asked it before he asked anything else, and that the asking was not perfunctory. Isla had a difficult afternoon. Colic, Dr. Voss thinks. Marco is thriving, which is annoying because he's the one who needed to catch up. She looked at him. "That's their names. I thought you should know since you seem to be asking about them daily." Something shifted in his face. Again, that thing that broke through the surface before he could stop it. It was there, and then it wasn't, but she was getting better at catching it. "Marco and Isla," he said. "Yes." "Good names." "I know." He almost smiled. She wasn't sure. It was brief enough that she might have been wrong. He sat in the chair across the room, the one he'd taken to sitting in during these evening conversations, which had started formally and were becoming something else, something that she couldn't quite categorize and wasn't sure she should. And he told her what he knew about the current situation. Slade had gone quiet, which he said was more concerning than noise. A quiet Slade was a Slade who was planning. His contacts in the Northeast were monitoring. "You said someone in your organization was working with Slade," Evelyn said. "Were there others?" "Possibly." "Are you sure the breach has been contained?" He looked at her. "No." She appreciated the honesty, even though it was frightening. "What does that mean for us? For me and the twins?" "It means I'm operating with a degree of uncertainty that I prefer not to operate with. It means additional protocols." He paused. "It means that I am trusting fewer people with information about your presence here." "And that's different from usual?" "More selective, yes." "Who knows I'm here?" "Kara? Dr. Voss? My head of security, Dante. 3 others whose loyalty I am certain of." "How certain?" "Certain enough that I'd stake my life on it." "You're staking my children's lives on it." The words landed between them. He didn't flinch from them. "Yes," he said. "I know that." She held his gaze. "Then be right." He left at 10 o'clock. She watched the door after it closed and thought about what she was doing, placing her children's safety in the hands of a man who operated outside every legal and social structure she had spent her life trusting. She thought about how that should feel more terrifying than it did. She thought about why it didn't. The answer was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable because it had something to do with the fact that Lucien Moretti had never once lied to her. He had told her things that were difficult and given her information she didn't want and maintained a consistency between what he said and what he did that was, she was forced to acknowledge, more than she could say about the man she had married. On the 6th day, she found the room. She hadn't been exploring. She'd been looking for Kara to ask about a specific formula supplement Dr. Voss had mentioned, and she'd taken a wrong turn in the east wing of the house, and the door was open, just slightly, just enough that when she reached to knock, it swung wider under the pressure of her knuckle, and she saw inside. It was a library, or had been once. Now it was something else, a workspace, or the ghost of one. 3 walls of books, a fireplace, a large desk that had papers scattered across it with the organized chaos of ongoing work. And on the 4th wall, arranged with a precision that seemed at odds with the desk's comfortable disorder, were photographs. Not family photographs. Operational ones. Maps. Printouts of what appeared to be surveillance images. Names and locations connected by lines drawn in red marker across a large paper affixed to the wall. She stepped inside because she couldn't stop herself. She was looking at the wall the way you look at the thing you know you shouldn't look at, but can't stop looking at because it's confirming something your body already knew. Gavin's name was on the wall. In the upper right quadrant, connected by lines to 2 other names she didn't recognize and one she did. Victor Slade, printed and circled twice. There were dates. There were amounts. There were photographs of her husband in places she had never known him to go, with people she had never known him to know. She was still looking when she heard footsteps. Lucien's face when he appeared in the doorway was the most unguarded she'd seen it, not alarmed, but uncertain in a specific way. The uncertainty of a man who has been caught doing something he hadn't decided how to explain. "How long have you known?" she said. Her voice was very quiet. The quiet that happened when she was past the point where volume would help. "Known what specifically?" "About Gavin. About all of it." She gestured at the wall. "This isn't recent. This is months of work." A pause. He entered the room and stood behind the desk and looked at the wall with her, not pretending he hadn't seen it before. "I began investigating your husband 7 months ago," he said, "when the repayment schedule collapsed and he became evasive. Standard procedure is to build a complete picture. Associates, assets, vulnerabilities," he paused. "Collateral options. So you knew about me 7 months ago." "I knew you existed. I did not know—" "Did you know about the pregnancy?" Another pause, fractionally longer. "Yes," he said. She turned to look at him. "You knew I was pregnant and you let him forge my name on a document." "I did not know about the document until 3 weeks ago. The document was created without my authorization. It violated our protocols. When I found out—" He stopped. "When I found out, I began the process of determining its origin and voiding its validity. That is what led me to identify the leak to Slade. That is why I was at the hospital, not to collect on it, to shut it down." "But you knew about me for 7 months," she said. "You built a file on my life for 7 months and said nothing. What would you have wanted me to say? Mrs. Carter, your husband owes my criminal organization $7 million and may have used your name as a financial instrument." "Yes," she said. "Exactly that. Yes." The word hit him. She could see it hit him. "I made a judgment," he said. "You made a judgment about my life," she said, "about my children's lives. You decided I didn't need to know the thing that was most directly going to affect me, and you made that decision from a file in a wall of photographs while I was 7 months pregnant and living with a man who was already gone." Her voice was still quiet. That was almost worse than if she'd been yelling. How long was I going to be collateral before someone thought I deserved to know? He didn't have an answer, or if he did, he had the sense not to offer it. She looked at the wall for one more moment, Gavin's face in a photograph, taken from a distance, him laughing at something with a man she didn't recognize outside a restaurant she'd never been to. And then she walked out of the room and down the hall and back to her children. She did not slam the door. That night, Dante, Lucien's head of security, a broad, quiet man in his late 40s, who moved like someone who had been in serious situations and come out of them, knocked on her door at 11 p.m. Not to threaten, to inform. "Mr. Moretti asked me to tell you directly," Dante said. "We've had a report from our contact in the Northeast. Slade has moved personnel into the city. We believe he's identified your location." Evelyn looked at Dante. "How many?" she said. "Unknown at this point?" Dante's face was steady. "Mr. Moretti is convening his security team now. He wanted you to know before the meeting, not after." She stood there in the doorway in borrowed clothes, holding the baby monitor in her hand, and she thought about the wall in the library and the photograph of her husband laughing, and she thought about how the choices of men she had never had any power over had systematically reduced the perimeter of her world to this room, this hallway, this guarded estate with its old stone walls and iron gates that she had never asked to be inside. She thought about Marco and Isla asleep in their bassinets 6 feet behind her. "Tell him I want to be in the meeting," she said. Dante blinked, just once. "Mrs. Carter, I'm not asking," she said. "Tell him." Dante looked at her for a moment with an expression that recalibrated something, and then he nodded once and went back down the hallway. And Evelyn Carter turned to check on her children, and then went to find something to wear that wasn't going to make anyone in that room think she could be dismissed. She was done being managed. She was done being the variable that other people accounted for. If Victor Slade was coming, she was going to know exactly what was coming and why, and she was going to be in the room where the decisions were made, because the alternative was waiting in the dark for men to decide her fate again. And she had already lived that story once in a hospital room while a red second hand moved around a white clock face, and she would not live it again. She found her shoes. She put them on. She walked toward the sound of voices at the end of the hall. The security room was in the basement. Evelyn had not been to the basement. She followed the sound of voices down a staircase behind a door she'd assumed was a closet, and the staircase opened into a space that was a different world from the house above it. No old wood, no dark fabric, no the weight of accumulated decades aesthetic that the upper floors projected. Down here it was concrete and fluorescent light and the hum of server equipment and screens, multiple screens mounted in a bank along one wall, each showing a different angle of the estate's exterior in the greenish monochrome of night vision feed. 6 men were in the room. Dante, she recognized. Lucien stood at the center of the screen bank with his back to the staircase. 2 men she'd seen on the grounds. 2 she hadn't. Every head in the room turned when she came through the door. Lucien turned last. He looked at her for one moment, and she could see him calculating. Not whether to send her back upstairs, she thought, but whether sending her back upstairs was a battle worth the cost. And then he looked at Dante with an expression that communicated something she couldn't read, and Dante gave the smallest possible nod. "Mrs. Carter," Lucien said, "come in." She came in. She stood at the edge of the group and did not take the chair that one of the men she didn't recognize moved slightly in her direction, because sitting would put her below the eye line of everyone standing, and she was done with positions of disadvantage. "Show me," she said. Lucien turned back to the screens. On one of them, a map of the surrounding area was overlaid with small red markers. 6 of them, positioned at intervals around the estate's perimeter, like a bracket closing. "Slade's personnel arrived in the city 6 hours ago," Dante said. "We have confirmation from 2 independent sources. Current positioning suggests a coordinated approach. They're not moving yet, but they're placing themselves for movement." "How many total?" Evelyn asked. Dante looked at her, then at Lucien, who said nothing, then back at her. "Best estimate, 14. "Against how many of yours?" "On the estate grounds currently, 9. Additional personnel can be here within 40 minutes. 40 minutes is a long time." "Yes," Dante said. "It is." She looked at the red markers on the map. 14 men positioned around a house where she had 2 newborns sleeping and a recovery that was 11 days old and counting. She breathed through the calculation of that, through the specific fear that came with it, and when she was done breathing, she said, "What's the plan?" Lucien glanced at her sideways. "We reinforce the perimeter. Additional personnel are already in transit. If Slade moves before they arrive," he paused, "we manage." "That's not a plan. That's a contingency." "Evelyn." His use of her first name was unusual. She'd noticed he did it rarely, and only when the situation had moved past the formality that surname use maintained. "We are not without options." "What are the options?" The men in the room had gone very still in the specific way that people went still when they were watching a dynamic they hadn't anticipated and weren't sure how to calibrate around. She was aware of it. She didn't care. "The most effective option," Lucien said with the careful phrasing of a man choosing words, "is one I've been resistant to pursuing." "What is it?" "Negotiation." He said it the way some people said a word in a language they found aesthetically unpleasant. "Slade wants leverage. The basis of his claim is the collateral document. If I meet with him and formally void the document in front of a shared intermediary, acknowledge that it was unauthorized, that it carries no weight, that the debt is between my organization and Gavin Carter alone, He loses his pretext. Then do that. Doing that requires a meeting with Slade on neutral ground in the next few hours before he decides the tactical approach is more efficient than the diplomatic one. So go meet with him. If I leave the estate tonight, the estate is less protected. He looked at her steadily. That is the calculation I have been sitting with. She understood then. He'd been sitting with the choice of whether to leave her and the twins in order to protect them, and the choice had stalled him because both options carried risk, and there was no clean version of either. I'll be here, she said. Dante will be here. Your other men. I know. If staying here and waiting is the option that ends with 14 men coming over your walls, then go. She held his gaze. Go do what you need to do. I'll manage what's here. He looked at her for a long moment with something that was not quite the usual calibrated control, something slightly more exposed than that. 2 hours, he said. I'll be back in 2 hours. He left with 2 of the men. The SUV's headlights swept across the grounds on the exterior camera feed and then disappeared through the gate, and the gate closed, and Evelyn stood in the basement security room with Dante and 4 other men and watched the red markers on the map and waited. The first hour passed without movement from the markers. She went upstairs twice to check on Marco and Isla, both sleeping with the absolute unconscious commitment of the very young, oblivious to everything except their own needs, which struck her as the correct response to the situation. She stood over their bassinets in the dark and listened to them breathe and thought about the next 2 hours, and then went back downstairs because the waiting was easier when she could watch the screens. Dante was at the monitor bank when she returned. He had coffee, actual coffee, not the watered-down version the hospital had provided, and he handed her a cup without being asked. You were a problem he didn't account for, Dante said. He wasn't looking at her, he was looking at the screens. What does that mean? Moretti, his plans, his calculations. They're thorough. They account for most variables. He drank his coffee. He didn't account for you walking into that security meeting and being right about the things you were right about. She looked at the side of his face. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. A pause. He doesn't adjust easily. When something doesn't fit the model, he usually... Dante stopped. He usually finds a way to make it fit. But not this time. Not this time. She thought about what that meant and decided not to think about it any further because she was 11 days postpartum and operating on broken sleep, and there were 14 armed men positioned around this building, and she had a finite amount of cognitive bandwidth to spend. At the 1 hour 20-minute mark, one of the red markers moved. Just one. A single position shift, northeast quadrant, 30 meters closer to the perimeter wall. Every person in the room felt it before anyone spoke. That's a probe, said one of the men she didn't know. Early 30s, lean, the kind of face that had seen enough to stop being surprised. His name, she had learned, was Ren. He's testing response time. Dante was already on his radio. The men on the grounds responded. Their positions updated on the secondary screen, blue markers tightening toward the northeastern sector. The moved red marker stopped. 30 seconds? A minute. Then it moved back to its original position. Dante exhaled. He saw the response, Ren said. He knows the coverage. Which tells him we're at standard capacity, Dante said. Not reinforced. He looked at the clock on the wall. Where are our additional personnel? 22 minutes. 22 minutes. The math was not comfortable. Evelyn's phone, the secure device Kara had brought her on the second day, buzzed on the console where she'd set it. She looked at the screen. A message from a number she didn't recognize. 7 words. The doctor. She's not who she says. She stared at the message. Her first thought was misdirected. Someone reaching the wrong number. Her second thought came half a second behind it and landed with the specific cold weight of something that was not a mistake. She showed the screen to Dante. Dante looked at it. His face went through something in under a second. The professional suppression of alarm, which was itself alarming. He took the phone from her without asking permission and crossed the room and handed it to Ren, who looked at it and started typing on one of the keyboard terminals. Where did this come from? Dante said. Not to her, to Ren. Tracking it. Ren's fingers moved fast, bounced through 3 relays, Give me 90 seconds. What does it mean? Evelyn said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of her voice. The doctor, Voss. What does it mean that she's not who she says? Dante turned to face her, and she could see him deciding how much to tell her, and she watched the decision happen in real time and said, "Tell me everything, or I walk upstairs and get Dr. Voss and ask her myself." He believed her. She could see that he believed her. Renata Voss has been with Mr. Moretti's organization for 9 years, Dante said. Physician, trusted, cleared for high-level operations. He paused. 18 months ago, her brother was taken by Slade's organization, held as leverage over a debt of his own. Another pause. We were told the brother was released when the debt was settled. We're told, Evelyn said. Yes. You don't know if he was. We did not independently verify. Dante's jaw was tight. Mr. Moretti made a decision to trust her account. Evelyn looked at the stairs. Upstairs, in a room 2 doors down from her children, Dr. Renata Voss had an apartment suite and presumably a phone and 9 years of intimate knowledge of this estate's layout, this room's existence, these protocols. 9 years of information about exactly where things were and how they worked and which door led to which hallway. Has she been in contact with anyone outside the estate since I arrived? Evelyn said. Wren answered without looking up. Checking communications logs now. A pause. 3 outgoing encrypted messages in the past 11 days. They were flagged as personal. We have a protocol that allows staff a degree of private communication. Get Moretti on the phone, Evelyn said. He's in a meeting with Slade. Get him on the phone now. She looked at Dante. If Voss has been feeding information to Slade, then the meeting Lucien just walked into is not a negotiation. It's a trap. It's a way of getting him off the estate and getting information about our reduced security and how... She stopped. Took a breath. Call him, Dante called. The phone rang through to a secondary line. A voice she didn't recognize answered, one of Lucien's men at the meeting location, and told Dante that Moretti was in the room and couldn't be interrupted. Interrupt him, Dante said. A pause. The sound of movement on the other end. Voices. And then, from somewhere behind those voices, something she couldn't identify for one fractured second. A sound that was dense and percussive and wrong. The kind of wrong that the body identified before the brain caught up. The line went dead. Dante looked at her. She looked at the screen where the red markers had been. The red markers were moving. Not one, all of them. Converging on the estate from 6 directions with the coordinated precision of something that had been timed. They're coming, Wren said. Flat, factual. Dante was already moving, radio in hand, calling positions, running the rapid reconfiguration of a defensive plan that had just lost its margin of time. The room went from tense to operational in under 4 seconds, men moving to posts they'd clearly been assigned in advance. Wren locked onto screens, calling coordinates, the whole machinery of preparation grinding into its emergency mode. Evelyn stood in the middle of it and did the one calculation that mattered. Lucien's phone line, the sound before it cut. 14 men moving toward the estate at a time when Lucien had taken 2 of their best people with him. A doctor who had been in this house for 11 days, knowing where every room was and which one held 2 newborn children. She ran, up the stairs, through the main hall, up the second staircase. She hit the landing at a sprint that her body complained about, and she ignored it and went left, away from her room, toward Dr. Voss's suite, because she needed to know before she did anything else. She needed to see the woman's face when she knocked on that door. She needed confirmation from the only source that would tell her the truth without being able to hide it. She knocked. Nothing. She tried the handle. Unlocked. She pushed it open. The room was empty. Not recently vacated, but thoroughly vacated, in the particular way that rooms looked when the person who had been living in them had removed every personal item with deliberate care. The bed was made. The surface of the desk was clear. The medical bag that had sat on the chair by the window for 11 days was gone. Gone. Not downstairs. Not in another room. Gone in a way that had required packing, which had required time. which meant she had known. She had known before the red markers moved. She had known before Lucien left. She had started clearing her room before any of this began. Because she'd known when it was going to begin, because she had been the one to tell Slade when to begin it. Evelyn stood in the empty room and felt the shape of it. The 11 days of access, the twice daily checks on Marco and Isla's weights and temperatures and reflexes, the professional thoroughness that had felt like competence and was also surveillance, also intelligence gathering, also the specific attention of someone who needed to know exactly what she was dealing with before she handed over the information that would be used against it. She thought about Dr. Voss's hands on her children. She turned and went back down the hall to her room. She went to the bassinets. Both children were there. Both awake now, disturbed by something. The vibration of people running in the house, maybe, or the particular change in the air that happened when adrenaline flooded the adults around them. Marco was making the preliminary sounds that preceded crying. Isla was already there, her face red and furious. Evelyn picked up Isla first, then Marco, and held both of them against her chest, and stood in the middle of the room and breathed. From outside, distantly, she heard the first sound from the perimeter. Not an explosion, not yet. The sharp, compressed report of a weapon being fired once, then twice, then a pause, then several more in rapid succession. The assault had started. She looked around the room with the particular clarity that arrived in moments when every non-essential thing fell away. What she needed, the children, something to carry them in, the phone in her pocket. What she knew, there was a room somewhere in this house that Lucien had described in passing on the third night, during one of their conversations, when she had asked him, in the same direct way she asked him everything, what happened if someone came while he was managing something else. He had told her about the bunker. He hadn't told her where it was. He'd told her Dante would know. She wrapped Marco and Isla together in the blanket from the bed, tight, together, the way Dr. Voss had shown her, and she did not let herself think about the hands that had shown her, and she went to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty. Distantly, the sound of the radio from the basement drifted up through the floor. She moved toward the stairs. She met Kara coming up them. Kara's face was a different composition than Evelyn had seen before. Not the guarded efficiency of a household staff member doing her job, but something rawer, scared in the way that people were scared when the scaffolding of safety came down suddenly. "Where's the bunker?" Evelyn said. She didn't stop walking. She kept moving toward the stairs, and Kara turned and came with her automatically. "Dante told you. You've been briefed on emergency protocols, yes?" "Yes, Show me." Kara showed her. The bunker entrance was behind a panel in the back of the kitchen, behind the industrial refrigeration unit that had to be manually rolled 18 inches to the left to access the door. The door itself was steel, 2 inches thick, with a biometric lock. Kara had the access. Evelyn did not ask why or how. She filed it and moved through the door and down a second staircase, steeper than the one to the security room, into a space below the basement level that smelled of concrete and recycled air and the particular quality of a room sealed against the outside world. It was not luxurious, but it was functional. A cot, a second, a third, a cabinet of supplies, water, food, medication, a first aid kit, a locked box that she suspected held a weapon, a monitor screen, currently dark, that she guessed could access the security feeds. She set the children on the larger cot and unwrapped them and checked them by feel in the low light. Heartbeats, breathing, temperature. Marco was still making noise. Isla had gone quiet, which was her pattern, the silence that preceded a larger announcement. Evelyn worked through the check with the automatic efficiency of 11 days of practice, and when she was done, she looked at Kara. "Can you reach Dante from here?" "There's a radio." Kara moved to the cabinet. "And Lucien, is there a way to reach him directly?" "There's an emergency line, a number that's separate from his operational phones." Kara found the radio and then found a laminated card taped to the inside of the cabinet door. She handed it to Evelyn. "That number." Evelyn looked at it. From above them, through the concrete ceiling, she could hear, barely, at the threshold of audibility, the sound of the estate continuing to absorb whatever was happening to it. Percussion, movement, the deep structural vibration of something heavy and irreversible. She thought about Lucien's phone cutting out. She thought about the sound she'd heard in the moment before it cut. She dialed the emergency number on the laminated card. It rang 3 times. 3 times that felt like much longer than 3 times, each ring its own small suspended eternity, and then connected. The voice on the other end was his. "Lucien," she said, "tell me you're alive." A beat, then, "I'm alive." His voice was different, compressed, controlled, but underneath it something she hadn't heard from him before. Something that sounded like pain. "Where are you?" "The bunker. Both children are with me. Kara is here." She kept her voice level. "What happened?" A pause. "The meeting was designed to contain me. Slade's men were there." His breath was audible. "I walked into it." "Are you hurt?" "Manageable," which was not no. "My men are handling it. I'll be at the estate within—" Something happened on his end that she heard his movement and then something falling. 30 minutes. Stay in the bunker." "Dr. Voss is gone," she said. "She was working with Slade. She cleared her room before they moved. She's been feeding information to him for I don't know how long." Silence on the line. The kind of silence that was not absence of thought, but presence of something too large for immediate verbal response. "Lucien, I heard you." His voice very quiet. "She had access to my children for 11 days. "I know." She knew this room's location. She would have told Slade where— "Evelyn." His voice cut across hers, not harsh, precise. The way you spoke to someone when you needed them to receive a specific message without interference. "The bunker has a separate protocol. Voss had access to the main estate layout, not the bunker, not the entrance. That information was compartmentalized after—" He stopped. A breath. "After I made the decision that she was the one variable I couldn't fully verify." She processed that. "You suspected her," she said. "I suspected a possibility. I did not have confirmation." "But you compartmentalized the bunker location." "Yes." "So you protected them." She said it and then hated the relief in it. The relief of discovering that even the failure had a margin of forethought built into it. "I should have confirmed the possibility before tonight," he said. "I should have moved faster." Another breath, and this one she could hear was costing him something physical. "I did not. That is on me." Dante's voice cut in from somewhere near Lucien. She could hear it behind him, calling positions. And she could hear the estate's perimeter battle in the background of the call. The percussion she'd been hearing through the ceiling, now audible through the phone line as well, layered and immediate. "Go," she said. "Handle it. Come back. Stay in the bunker. Do not open the door for anyone who doesn't give you the code." "What's the code?" He told her. 4 words. She repeated them back to him and he said yes, and then the line quality changed. Movement on his end, men around him, the shift from conversation to operation. And she said his name one more time and he said, "I'm coming." And the call ended. She sat on the cot between her children and held the phone and listened to the sounds coming through the bunker ceiling and thought about what she knew. She knew that Renata Voss had spent 11 days in close proximity to her children with information she'd been passing to the man now attacking this estate. She knew that Lucien had suspected a possibility and built a protection around it and had not told her. She knew that Gavin's death had created a chain of events that had pulled her into the center of a war she had never consented to fight, and that every person around her, Lucien, Dante, Kara, the men on the perimeter, Slade's men on the other side of the walls, was moving in response to decisions that Gavin Carter had made while sitting across a dinner table from her and saying comfortable and meaning catastrophic. And she knew one other thing, the thing that had been assembling itself from pieces over 11 days and had finally completed its shape tonight in the silence of this room. She knew that Gavin was not simply gone. The photograph on the wall of Lucien's library, the names connected to Gavin's name by red lines. One name she'd recognized as Victor Slade. One she hadn't known at the time, but she'd had 11 days to think about it. 11 days of quiet and broken sleep and the particular clarity that came from having nothing to do but nurse children and think. And in that time, the second name on the wall had stopped being unknown. She had seen that name on a document, a contract signed 2 years ago relating to a property investment Gavin had made in the southeastern region. A contract she'd been asked to witness and had signed without reading the full subsidiary agreements because she'd trusted him. The second name on the wall was the same name as the man listed as silent partner in that contract, which meant Gavin hadn't just borrowed from Lucian's organization. He hadn't just run from his debt. He had been working with Slade, actively, as a planted intelligence source inside the financial relationship with Moretti's organization. Feeding information about vulnerabilities and assets for what she could now see was at minimum 2 years. Her husband had not been a desperate man who borrowed too much money. Her husband had been a spy. And somewhere in this city tonight, the man who had signed away her name and her children's names and vanished through a hospital stairwell with a bag he'd packed in advance was not simply hiding. He was waiting. Marco began to cry in earnest now, the full-throated announcement of a child who had decided patience was finished. And Isla joined him 2 seconds later, and the sound of both of them together in the sealed concrete room was almost unbearable in its immediacy, its need, its total indifference to everything happening above them. Evelyn picked them both up and held them, and said nothing because nothing she could say would help, and the sounds coming through the ceiling were getting closer. The bunker ceiling had a crack in it. Evelyn had not noticed it before. It ran diagonally from the upper left corner of the room to approximately the midpoint of the ceiling, 3 feet long and hairline thin, the kind of structural mark that was old and settled and probably meaningless. She stared at it now because it gave her eyes somewhere to go while she held both children against her chest and counted the sounds coming through the concrete above her head and tried to build a picture from audio alone. Gunfire, sporadic, then concentrated, then sporadic again, which she was learning in this terrible accelerated education, meant people moving between positions rather than a sustained exchange. Heavy footfall on the floor above. Once, a sound she felt more than heard, a deep concussive thud that moved through the building's frame and into the cot's legs and up through the mattress into her spine. Kara was at the radio. She had reached Dante 12 minutes ago. A brief exchange, voices tight and clipped, and since then the radio had been silent in both directions. "What did he say?" Evelyn had asked. "Perimeter breach. Northeast wall. His men are containing." Kara had not elaborated, and Evelyn had not pushed because the quality of Kara's voice told her that containing was doing significant work in that sentence. Marco had stopped crying. He was in the particular exhausted stillness that followed a full cry, his weight heavy against her shoulder, his breath warm on her neck. Isla was still awake, her eyes dark and steady in the low light, watching Evelyn's face with the uncanny attention that newborns sometimes fixed on the person they had decided was the center of the world, 11 days old and already certain about something. Evelyn looked back at her daughter and thought about Gavin. She thought about the contract, the name. 2 years of deliberate infiltration while he sat across from her at dinner and said comfortable and asked how she was feeling and kissed her forehead with lips that were planning his exit strategy. She thought about the specific architecture of that kind of line, not the desperate improvisation of a man in over his head, but the sustained, constructed deception of someone who had chosen a side and maintained the performance long enough to become undetectable. She thought about what a man like that would do when the performance was over, when the cover was blown and the money was moved and the exit was taken. Would he stop? Would the calculation that had driven 4 years of double dealing simply resolve itself into a quiet life somewhere outside extradition range? Or would he look at the board and see one more move available, one piece still in play? Small, valuable. The kind of leverage that worked on everyone. On Slade, who wanted a weapon against Moretti, and on Moretti, who had said, "I give you my word," and stay in the bunker with a tension in his voice that she now understood was not just operational stress. She looked at Isla. She looked at Marco's sleeping face against her shoulder. He would come for them. Not because he loved them. She no longer believed in that version of Gavin, had been dismantling it piece by piece over 11 days until there was nothing left of it. But because they were the most portable and effective instrument of pressure available to a man who had burned every other bridge and needed something to trade. The thought arrived not as panic, but as a cold, structural recognition. The kind of knowing that came before fear because it was more fundamental than fear. the bedrock on which fear was eventually built. She was still sitting with it when the door moved. Not the heavy steel main door. That hadn't moved. The biometric lock was intact. No one had given the code. The other sound. Behind the supply cabinet on the east wall. A sound she hadn't registered during the previous hour as anything other than the building settling, because it was subtle. A sequence of contact sounds, material on material, that only assembled into meaning when she heard them as a sequence instead of individual events. Someone was on the other side of the east wall. She moved before she was conscious of deciding to move. She set Isla down on the cot with a speed and care that her hands somehow managed simultaneously, and she crossed the room in 4 steps and took the locked box from the cabinet shelf and looked at Kara. Kara, to her credit, was already on her feet. "The combination," Evelyn said. I don't know if... Kara. She kept her voice below the threshold of noise, below everything. "The combination," Kara told her. She opened the box. Inside was a handgun, compact, loaded, the safety on. She had fired a weapon exactly 4 times in her life. Once at a range, years ago, twice more at the same range when she'd decided 4 years into the marriage that she wanted to know how, and once at a paper target that had done nothing to resist her. She checked the safety the way she remembered checking it. She held the gun at her side and looked at the east wall. The sounds had stopped. 20 seconds of nothing. The bunker's recycled air, the children's breathing, Kara's elevated respiration, the distant percussion of the estate's battle coming through the ceiling. Then the wall panel moved. It came inward. Not the whole wall, a section of it. A 2-foot-wide panel that she would not have known was a panel if she hadn't watched it happen. A maintenance access built into the construction that someone had known about, had planned for, had used to bypass the main entrance entirely. The person who came through it was not one of Slade's men. It was Gavin. He was in clothes she didn't recognize. Dark, practical, nothing like the imported suits she'd cataloged in their closet for 5 years. He'd grown a beard in whatever time had passed since the hospital, and it changed the shape of his face in a way that was meant to, she understood, meant to make him look different enough to move through the world without being immediately recognized. It mostly worked. But the eyes were the same. She'd know those eyes anywhere. She'd made promises to those eyes. He came through the panel and straightened and saw her and the gun at her side, and he stopped. They looked at each other across a concrete room. "Evelyn," he said. "Don't," she said. He put his hands up, slowly, palms out, the universal gesture that she recognized immediately as something he'd calculated before coming through that panel, a performance of non-threat that he'd prepared the way he prepared everything, with advanced consideration of how it would land. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I know why you're here. Evelyn, you're here for one of them." She heard her own voice. It was very steady. She was remotely surprised by that. As leverage. Because everyone you've tried to use has either run out of value or turned against you, and you need something that still works. She looked at him without blinking. "You're not going to get them." He was doing the calculation. She could see it happening. His eyes moving to the children on the cot, to Kara near the radio, to the gun, back to her face. Measuring distances and variables the way he'd been measuring things for years, and she thought about how she had mistaken that particular quality of attention for intelligence, for presence, for a man who was actually looking at her when he looked at her, when actually he'd always been looking at the board. "You know everything," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know enough." "Then you know that Moretti isn't what he's presented himself as. You know what kind of man you're staying with." "I know exactly what kind of man I'm staying with," she said. "He didn't forge my signature." Something shifted in Gavin's face. Not guilt. She didn't think guilt was in his repertoire anymore, if it ever had been. Something more like adjustment, the recalibration of a plan encountering an obstacle. "He'll eventually use you," Gavin said. "The same way he uses everyone. You're still a debt recovery to him, Evelyn. You're still a..." "Stop." The word came out hard enough that Marco stirred against the cot, and she felt it in her peripheral vision and did not look away from Gavin. "I was a debt recovery to you first. I was a cover story. 5 years, Gavin. 5 years of... what? What was I? What were they? She gestured toward the cot without moving the gun. Because you signed their names before they had names, before they had faces. So tell me what they were to you. Gavin's hands were still up. His jaw moved. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he said. I know that's what you believe, she said. I know that's the story you tell yourself. It was supposed to be contained. It was supposed to be manageable. None of this was supposed to happen. She looked at him. It always goes this far, Gavin. This is where this road ends. Right here. He moved. Not toward her. Sideways toward the cot, and the calculation was clear and immediate. She would not shoot in the direction of the children. She would hesitate. The hesitation was the window. He'd worked it out. He moved with the speed of a man who had made this decision before he came through the wall panel and was executing it now. She moved faster. Not with the gun. She put herself between him and the cot in 2 steps, which was not something she could have done gracefully 11 days post-delivery of twins, which was not something she should have been able to do without real pain, and the pain was absolutely real, and she absorbed it and put it somewhere she would deal with later and squared herself in front of her children and raised the weapon. He stopped. 3 feet. She had not been at 3 feet from Gavin Carter in 11 days, and the distance was strange, close enough to see the lines around his eyes, the stress in the set of his jaw, the quality of his skin that told her he hadn't been sleeping well wherever he'd been hiding, close enough that some old biological memory tried to surface, and she pushed it down with everything she had. Don't, she said again, the same word, a different meaning. He looked at the gun. He looked at her face. You won't, he said. I've had 11 days to work out exactly what I would and wouldn't do, she said. I've had 11 days in this house with your children to think about what I'm capable of. You don't know what I'll do anymore, Gavin. You never did. The door opened. The main door, the steel one, the biometric lock, opened with the sound of its mechanism releasing, and she kept her eyes on Gavin for the half second it took to understand from the sound of the footsteps that it was not Slade's men, and then Lucian came through the door. He took in the room in one sweep. Her, standing in front of the cot with the gun raised. Gavin, 3 feet away with his hands coming back up. Kara against the far wall. The children on the cot. He looked at Gavin with an expression that was the most controlled she had ever seen on a human face. Controlled the way something was controlled when the alternative to that control was catastrophic. There was blood on his left side. His jacket was gone. His shirt was dark on the left from the hip upward for about 8 inches, and he was standing in a way that favored his right leg, and she saw all of this in the 2 seconds before he moved further into the room and positioned himself beside her so that the 3 of them formed a triangle. Her, Lucian, Gavin, with the cot at her back. Gavin Carter, Lucian said. His voice was completely even. I've been looking forward to this. Gavin's eyes went to the blood on Lucian's side, and she could see the calculation update. Injured, potentially compromised, worth reassessing. She saw it happen, and she wanted to tell him that the calculation was wrong, that she had spent 11 days watching this man, and whatever he was right now, however much blood was on his shirt, he was not compromised in any way that would help Gavin. It's over, Lucien said. Slade is contained. Your operation has no patron. Whatever your exit plan was, it's done. Gavin looked between them. Something in his face moved through several phases quickly. The reassessment, the recalculation, the specific expression of a man whose contingencies were running out in real time. She was going to shoot me, Gavin said. I know, Lucian said. Your own wife, Gavin said to Evelyn. You were actually going to, She's not your wife anymore, Lucian said. The words came out flat and certain, not as a claim but as a statement of existing fact, the way you would say the wall is concrete or the door is steel. Whatever she was to you ended the night you walked out of that delivery room. Gavin looked at her. She looked back. And the thing that she felt in that moment, the thing she would remember later with a specificity that surprised her, was not hatred, not grief, not the remnant of love curdling into something toxic. It was simpler than any of those. It was clarity. The clean, functional clarity of a person who has finally seen the complete shape of a thing that was previously obscured and who can now act in full knowledge. Put the gun down, Lucien said quietly. to her. "I'll handle this." "I'm fine," she said. "I know you are." His voice shifted register, barely, just a fraction, the control loosening 1 millimeter. "Put it down anyway." She lowered the weapon, not because he told her to, because she had made the choice that the gun was a resource for a specific condition, and that condition had changed when Lucian came through the door, and making the choice herself was different from complying with an instruction, and she understood that difference and maintained it. Dante came through the door behind Lucienne. Then Ren. The room, which had been 3 people and 2 infants in a sealed concrete space, was suddenly full in a way that changed every dynamic. Gavin looked at the room full of people and made one last calculation, and Evelyn saw it happen and saw it resolve in the direction of nothing. No play available, no angle remaining, all the contingencies exhausted. His hands came down. "It's over," Lucian said again. Not gloating. Informational. "Slade," Gavin said. "If Slade's gone, then I've got nothing to offer anyone. No leverage, no—" "You have information," Lucian said, "about your arrangement with Slade, about the financial structures you helped him build inside operations that were nominally mine, about the accounts and the contacts and the particular shape of what you spent 4 years constructing." He paused. "That information has value to certain federal agencies who have been building a case against Slade's organization for considerably longer than I've been dealing with this situation." He looked at Gavin steadily. Cooperation in that context might result in circumstances considerably more manageable than the alternative. Gavin's eyes went to the floor, then the wall, then the ceiling. The specific visual pattern of a man whose options had just been reduced to 1 and who was working out how to live with that. "And if I cooperate," he said, "what about the debt?" "The debt is between you and me," Lucienne said. "The federal cooperation doesn't clear that, but it does mean you live long enough to potentially address it." Evelyn looked at Gavin and felt nothing move in her face. She was done with the terrain of what she felt about Gavin Carter. It was mapped and finished, and there was nothing more to learn there. "I want a guarantee," Gavin said. "You don't have the standing to request guarantees," Lucienne said. Dante moved forward. It was not an aggressive movement, but it was definitive, and it communicated without language that the phase of this conversation where Gavin had any choices had ended. Gavin went with him. He walked past Evelyn without looking at her, and she watched him go and thought, "That is the last time. That is the last time I look at this man as someone whose choices I have to account for." After tonight, what he does or doesn't do is outside the perimeter of her life. After tonight, he is someone else's problem. The door closed. She turned around. Marco was awake. His eyes were open and fixed on the middle distance with the serene, unfocused attention of a child who had slept through the worst of it and woken to find the room quieter. Isla was asleep against the cot's edge, her face tucked, her small fist loosely closed against the mattress. Evelyn set the gun on the cabinet shelf and went to them and picked them both up and held them and breathed. Lucien was still in the room. He had not followed Dante out. He stood near the door with his right hand braced against the wall in a way that was not casual, braced in the way of someone managing a physical reality they weren't ready to broadcast. She looked at his side. "How bad?" she said. "Manageable." "You keep using that word. It keeps applying." "Lucien." She said his name the way he'd said hers, without surname, without distance, the thing that happened when formality had been made redundant by events. "Sit down." He sat. He found the second cot and sat on the edge of it with the controlled care of someone who was aware of what sitting down quickly would cost them. And once he was down, she could see from the change in his breathing that down was better than up had been. She put the children back on their cot and went to the first aid cabinet and found what she needed and crossed to him. He watched her come with an expression that was doing its best to be neutral and mostly succeeding. I know you don't need anything," she said. "Hold still." She worked on his side with the focused quiet of someone who had learned over 11 days to perform necessary tasks in the presence of stress without letting the stress decide the quality of the work. It was not a professional job. It was sufficient, pressure and clean gauze and the medical tape that was in the kit, enough to hold until Dr. Voss's replacement could be arranged, whoever that would be. He held still. He said nothing. His breathing was controlled and even, and only betrayed the pain when she applied the pressure, and even then, it was minimal, a slight change in the rhythm that she felt rather than heard. When she was done, she stayed where she was, closer than she had been to him in the 11 days of careful distance that they had both maintained around whatever was happening between them, around the thing that had no clean name because it had grown in too strange a soil to be called by ordinary names. She looked at him. He looked at her. He said I was still just a debt recovery to you, she said, that you were going to use me eventually. He said a lot of things in 4 years that weren't true. That's not an answer. No, he said. He held her gaze with that steadiness that she had stopped finding unnerving weeks ago and started finding something else. It's not. Then give me one. He was quiet for a moment. Below the ceiling, the estate was settling into a different quality of sound, not battle, not alert, but the particular aftermath of violence that was its own kind of silence. Outside somewhere, Dante was managing whatever came next. Outside, Gavin was being managed toward the conversation that would determine the rest of his significantly narrower life. And here there were 2 sleeping children and a man with blood on his shirt and a woman who had stood in front of her children with a gun and not shaken. You were never a debt recovery to me, Lucien said. Not after the first night. He paused. That is the honest answer. Everything else is complicated. I know everything else is complicated, she said. I know what you are and what this is and how none of it is simple. She looked at him. I'm not asking for simple. Outside the bunker door, boots on concrete, Wren's voice calling a position. The infrastructure of the estate reorganizing around the outcome of the night. Inside, the sound of 2 children breathing in the slow rhythm of the untroubled young. Lucien looked at her with an expression that had nothing managed about it, nothing calibrated, nothing presented for effect. The face underneath all the other faces. The one that had appeared for a fraction of a second in a hospital delivery room when a screaming boy announced himself, and a man who had learned to feel nothing had, briefly and involuntarily, felt something. He reached out and took her hand. Not a grand gesture, not a declaration, just contact. His hand around hers, warm and real, and carrying the specific weight of a man who had decided that the distance he'd built between himself and everything soft in the world had stopped serving him somewhere in the past 11 days, and he was done maintaining it. She let him. Outside the door, the estate waited. Outside the walls, the city went on. Somewhere, the pieces of what had happened tonight were being assessed and accounted for, and the next series of consequences were already in motion. Federal agencies and crime organizations and the specific machinery of a world that did not pause for the people caught inside it. But that was outside. And here, for this moment, there was only the sound of the children breathing and the feeling of a hand that was still warm and a decision that had not yet been spoken aloud but had already, in the way of all irreversible things, been made. The night did not end cleanly. Nights like that one never did. They dissolved instead, gradually, in stages, the way a body came down from adrenaline, not in a single drop, but in a long, uneven descent that left a person exhausted in ways that sleep couldn't fully address. The estate moved through its aftermath in the hours after the bunker, and Evelyn moved through it too, carrying the twins back upstairs when Dante confirmed the grounds were clear, settling them in the bassinets in the gray pre-dawn light, while the house around her hummed with the particular activity of people managing consequences. She did not sleep. She lay on the bed with her eyes open and listened to Marco and Isla breathe and let the night arrange itself in her mind. Not to process it, not yet, but simply to acknowledge the shape of it. What had happened, what it had cost. By 5 a.m, she could hear from somewhere on the ground floor the low, measured voices of men on phones, reports being made, arrangements being confirmed, the particular cadence of an organization closing its books on one chapter and opening the next. She thought about Gavin, not with the cold structural clarity of the bunker, differently now, with the specific tiredness that came after clarity when the precision of understanding had done its work and what was left was just the human residue of it, the waste product of 5 years, which was not love anymore but wasn't nothing either, which was the memory of having believed in something completely and having been completely wrong, which was a kind of grief even if the thing you were grieving for had never actually existed. She let herself feel it for exactly as long as it required, and then she set it down. At 7, Kara knocked. Evelyn told her to come in. Kara brought food. Actual food. Not the functional nutrition of the past 11 days, but something that had been cooked with attention, eggs and toast and coffee that smelled like itself, and set it on the table near the window and moved to leave. Kara, Evelyn said. She turned. Last night, when you brought me to the bunker, she looked at the young woman's face. You knew the combination to the locked box. You knew the emergency radio. You knew the access panel. She paused. How long have you been briefed on those protocols? Kara held her gaze. Since the second day, she said, Mr. Moretti instructed me. He told you to be ready. He said to be ready to get you and the children to the bunker if something happened while he was off the estate. He gave me the codes. She paused. He said he hoped I'd never need them. Evelyn nodded once. Kara left. Evelyn ate the food because her body required it and looked out the window at the grounds in the morning light. The old oaks, the stone wall, the iron gate at the end of the private road, and thought about a man who had compartmentalized the bunker location and briefed his household staff on emergency protocols and then gone to a meeting he suspected was a trap, because the alternative was to wait on the estate while 14 men closed around it. She thought about the difference between a man who managed people and a man who protected them. She was still sitting at the window when Dr. Aldrich Sen arrived. He was Lucien's physician, not the estate physician, his personal physician. A quiet man in his 60s who drove himself and carried his own bag and shook Evelyn's hand with the grip of someone who had been told to treat her with consideration and had decided to do so not because he was told to, but because she'd earned it somehow, just by the look of her in the morning light of that room. He won't be pleased that I came to you first, Dr. Sen said. I didn't ask you to. No, but I'm telling you that the wound is more significant than he represented last night, and he has refused twice this morning to remain in bed, and I am 63 years old and I stopped arguing with stubborn men about 30 years ago. He looked at her with calm expectation. I thought perhaps you might have more success. She found Lucien in the study on the ground floor, not the library with its wall of red-lined photographs, but a smaller room she hadn't been in before, lined with books that had actually been read judging by the state of their spines. He was at the desk. He was upright. He was on the phone with the focused efficiency of a man conducting business, and when she came through the door, he looked at her, and something crossed his face that was not surprise but was adjacent to it, the look of someone who has been caught doing the thing they were told not to do by the person who told them not to do it. He finished the call in 30 seconds and set the phone down. Dr. Sen, he said. Dr. Sen, she confirmed. She came to the desk and looked at him. The color in his face was not what it should have been. The controlled quality of his posture was costing him more than it usually did. She could see the effort of it, the slight rigidity that was management of pain rather than natural ease. You need to go back to bed. I need to manage what happened last night. You have people who do that. They need direction. Then direct them from bed. He looked at her. A long, steady look that was doing several things at once, assessing how serious she was, deciding whether to push back, processing whatever it was that had changed in the hours since the bunker, since the hand, since the thing that had not been spoken but had been made. The federal contacts need to be briefed, he said. The arrangement with Gavin. I know about the arrangement, she said. I was there. The details are specific. If Dante handles it without... Lucien. She put her hands on the desk and looked at him from a distance of 3 feet. You were shot last night. Go to bed. Dante is capable. The federal contacts will wait 2 hours. She held his gaze. And if the whole operation falls apart because you took 2 hours to let your side heal, then the operation has structural problems that have nothing to do with last night. His mouth did the thing that was almost a smile. You're very direct, he said. You noticed that about me on the first night. I did, he said. He pushed back from the desk. He stood, and she could see that standing cost him. and she moved to his left side without being asked, and he didn't tell her not to, which was its own kind of statement. They went up the stairs together in a silence that was not uncomfortable and reached the door of his room, and he stopped. "The federal briefing," he said. "I'll sit with Dante while he makes the calls. If anything requires your input, I'll come get you." He looked at her for a moment. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to do anything," she said. "That's been true since we left the hospital. I'm choosing to." He went in. She closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway for a moment, and then went to find Dante because there was work to do and she had offered to help with it, and she was not the kind of person who offered things she didn't mean. The federal briefing happened at 9 in the morning, not in the security room, in the dining room, which had a long table and better light and felt less like a war room, which Evelyn suspected was a deliberate choice by Dante, who had more subtlety than his size and his occupation suggested. 2 federal agents arrived at the gate and were escorted in, and they sat across the table from Dante and Ren, and, at Dante's mild surprise and then immediate accommodation, Evelyn. The agents' names were Kowalski and Park. They were both in their 40s. They had the particular quality of federal investigators who had been working organized crime long enough to have stopped being startled by the environments they found themselves in. A criminal organization's dining room at 9 in the morning, a woman who appeared to be a civilian with 2 infants upstairs, the landscape of aftermath. Agent Kowalski looked at Evelyn and said, "Mrs. Carter, you're aware that your presence here may complicate—" "I'm aware of a great number of things," she said, "including the fact that my husband spent at least 2 years functioning as an intelligence source for Victor Slade's organization while maintaining a financial relationship with the Moretti Syndicate. I witnessed the collateral document firsthand. I was present in the bunker when my husband entered through the access panel last night, and I have information about a contract I signed 2 years ago that connects Gavin Carter to Slade's organization through a real estate vehicle." She looked at Kowalski steadily. "Would you like me to leave, or would you like me to continue?" Kowalski looked at Park. Park looked at Kowalski. "Continue," Park said. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Evelyn spoke when she had something to contribute and was quiet when she didn't, which was the correct ratio. And by the end of it, the outline of what would become a federal cooperation agreement with Gavin Carter, in exchange for testimony that would dismantle the financial infrastructure Slade had built over a decade, was visible in its rough shape, like the structure of a building before the walls went up. Gavin would testify. Gavin would spend a managed period in federal custody and emerge into a life that was significantly reduced from the one he'd planned, but was a life nonetheless. The debt to the Moretti organization was a separate matter that the federal agreement did not address, and Agent Kowalski was careful not to ask too many questions about how that matter would be resolved, which told Evelyn something about how these particular federal agents understood the particular ecosystem they operated in. Victor Slade had been taken into federal custody at 4 in the morning after Lucien's security team had spent 3 hours creating conditions that made his position untenable. The details of that operation were not discussed in this room, and Evelyn did not ask about them, because she had calibrated her sense of what she needed to know and what she didn't, and the mechanics of how a man like Slade was made to surrender were in the second category. When the agents left, Dante looked at her across the long table. "Mr. Moretti is going to want a full account," he said. "I'll give him one," she said. "He's also going to have an opinion about you participating in a federal briefing." "He can have all the opinions he wants," she said. He was in bed. Dante looked at her for a moment, and then looked at his coffee, and then looked back at her with the expression of a man who had worked for Lucien Moretti for a long time and was updating a significant portion of his assumptions. "Yes," he said. He was. She went back upstairs. She checked the twins. Both awake, both demanding, both managed with the efficiency of a mother who had compressed 12 weeks of early learning into 11 days of high-pressure practice. She fed Marco and changed Isla and settled them both and sat in the chair by the window for 20 minutes, simply being present with them, which was something she had been able to do only in stolen moments during the past week and a half, and which she was going to do more of going forward, deliberately, as a practice, because they deserved her attention when nothing was on fire and she intended to give it to them. At 1 in the afternoon, she knocked on Lucien's door. He was awake. He was propped against the headboard with the look of a man who had been horizontal long enough to resent it and had not slept. And there was a phone face down on the bed beside him that he turned over when she came in, which told her he'd been working anyway, just horizontally. "The federal briefing," she said. "Dante told me." "All of it?" "Enough." His eyes moved over her face. "You gave them the contract information." "It connects Gavin to Slade. It strengthens the cooperation agreement. It helps build the case." She sat in the chair near the window. "Was that the wrong call?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "It was correct." But nothing." He shifted slightly against the pillow, and she could see the adjustment cost him. "It was correct. I would have made the same call." He paused. "I'm not accustomed to other people making those calls." "I know you're not." She looked at him. "You should get accustomed to it." He looked back at her. The room was quiet in the particular afternoon way of a house that had been through something large and was resting. Outside the window, one of the security men was doing a grounds walk. She could see him moving along the stone wall in the low winter light. "Gavin said I was still a debt to you," she said. She'd brought it up last night, and he'd answered, and she needed to bring it up again now in daylight, without the bunker and the blood and the particular extremity of that hour, because she needed to know what the answer was when the emergency had passed. "I need to hear what you think about that. Now, when everything is quiet." He held her gaze for a long time. "When I came to that hospital," he said slowly, as if the words were being selected from a place he didn't usually reach into. "I came for a recovery, for a situation to be contained. I had the document. I had the outstanding debt. I had the information about Slade's interest in the collateral." He paused. "I walked into a delivery room, and a woman was alone in it, and her body was doing the hardest thing a body does, and the man who should have been there had run." He stopped. "I stayed because it was the right thing to do, not because of the debt, because of what it was." She waited. "Everything after that," he said, "was also because of what it was, not what it was worth to me operationally, not what it resolved or represented or paid back." He looked at her with those dark eyes that gave away everything now. She realized, if you knew what to look for, if you'd had 11 days to learn the language of a face that had spent decades hiding itself. "You are not a debt to me, Evelyn. You haven't been since the first night. That is the honest answer in daylight." She sat with it. She turned it over the way she turned over all things now, carefully, with the understanding that she was no longer the person who took statements at face value and called it trust. She examined it. She tested it against 11 days of evidence. It held. "Okay," she said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Okay," she said again. "I believe you." "That's it? What else do you want?" The almost smile. Fuller now. Close enough to the real thing that she decided it was the real thing, just worn down at the edges by years of disuse. "Nothing," he said. "That's exactly enough." She stayed for another hour, sitting in the chair while he rested. Not sleeping, neither of them sleeping, just existing in the same room in the quiet, which was its own kind of thing, its own new category of what they were to each other. She told him about the federal meeting in detail. He listened. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both indicating that he'd absorbed everything Dante had told him and was triangulating it against what she was adding. His mind worked even horizontal and blood diminished, and that was something she was going to have to account for going forward, the fact that she was dealing with a man who was never fully off. She could work with that. She went back to the twins at 3 and didn't return until the following morning, when Dr. Sen came and went and reported that the wound was healing correctly and the patient was less of a management problem than anticipated, which she suspected was Dr. Sen's way of saying that Lucien had actually stayed in bed. The days that followed had a different texture from the first 11. The siege quality was gone. The red markers on the security room screens were gone. Slade's organization was in the process of a rapid internal collapse, as organizations do when their leadership is removed and the federal apparatus begins pulling on the threads that leadership had been maintaining, and the particular threat it had represented to this estate dissolved first into noise and then into silence. Dante reduced the security presence by 1/3 in the first week and by half in the second. Dr. Sen recommended, and then arranged, a replacement medical professional for the estate. A woman named Yolanda Marsh, early 40s, recommended through channels that Evelyn made Dante verify independently, which Dante did without commentary. Dr. Marsh met Evelyn on her first day with the combination of competence and directness that Evelyn had decided was the only professional presentation she was willing to accept, and they established a working relationship in under 20 minutes. Marco was thriving. He had gained weight with the aggressive commitment of a child who had decided existing was the project, and he was going to excel at it. He slept in blocks that were beginning to approximate human hours and woke with an opinion about everything and expressed that opinion at a volume that carried through walls. Isla remained herself, quieter, more watchful, with the particular quality of attention that made Evelyn think sometimes of her own mother, who had watched everything before she spoke and spoken rarely but precisely. Isla's 4 seconds of silence after her birth had not been a fluke. It appeared to be a temperament. Evelyn called her mother in Phoenix on the 3rd day after the siege, on the secure line, with the cover story that she and Gavin had separated, and she was staying with a friend while she got her footing. Her mother took the separation with the equanimity of a woman who had met Gavin Carter twice, and formed her opinion quietly, and kept it to herself out of respect for her daughter's choices. "Are you safe?" her mother asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I'm safe." "And the babies?" "Marco and Isla are perfect." She paused. "I want you to come see them. In a few weeks, when travel is easier, I'll arrange it." Her mother said yes. Her mother said of course. Her mother said, "I love you," in the direct, undecorated way that she said all important things. And Evelyn said it back with the particular weight of a woman who had spent the past several weeks in close proximity to what it meant to have people around you who would and wouldn't do certain things, and who understood now more precisely than she ever had what love looked like when it was the real version. Gavin's federal cooperation began 6 weeks after the siege. The indictment of Victor Slade's organization ran to 47 pages and named 14 co-conspirators. Gavin Carter's name appeared in the indictment as a cooperating witness rather than a defendant, which was the arrangement the federal agreement had produced and which represented the best version of the worst choices he had made. Lucien's organization was not named in the indictment. The particular architecture of the federal cooperation had been constructed in a way that kept the Moretti Syndicate outside the document's scope, which Agent Kowalski had negotiated with the kind of pragmatic flexibility that characterized people who had spent long enough working in complicated spaces to understand that the alternative to pragmatic flexibility was often nothing at all. Evelyn knew this. She held it. She did not pretend the organization Lucien ran was something other than what it was. She had 11 days and then 6 weeks, and then the accumulating time after that to look at it clearly, and she looked at it clearly, and she made her accounting. He had stayed. He had protected. He had told her the truth even when the truth was unflattering to him. He had built protections around her children before she knew she needed them. He had sat in a chair in her room in the evenings and told her things that were difficult and listened to things she said without trying to manage what she was feeling about them, which was a more rare quality in a man of any kind than it should have been. She was not naive about what he was. She was not performing naivety. She was making a clear-eyed accounting of a complicated person in a complicated situation and arriving at a conclusion that was not simple and did not need to be. The morning she moved her things fully from the guest suite to the room at the end of the west corridor, the room that was his, that they had been gravitating toward in the incremental way of 2 people who were both too honest to pretend it wasn't happening and too careful to rush what couldn't be rushed. She did it herself, with Kara's help, with Marco and Isla in a double bassinet that had been moved the day before. She didn't make an announcement. She didn't ask permission. She moved her things and she put them where they went, and she made the room into something that was both of theirs, which involved relocating 2 items of his that were in positions she found impractical and placing her books on the shelf that had space and putting a photograph of Marco and Isla on the bedside table on the left side of the bed, which was the side she'd been sleeping on in the guest room and which she intended to continue sleeping on. Lucien watched this from the doorway when he came in at 7 that evening. He looked at the room. He looked at the photograph. He looked at her. He didn't say anything. She looked back at him. "The shelf on the right is yours," she said. Don't move my books. He came into the room. He set his phone on the bedside table on the right side and sat on the right side of the bed and looked at the photograph of his children. She knew when she knew, and she knew then, in the exact moment she thought his children, that the accounting was complete, that this was what the word meant now in this house. For a long, quiet moment. "You moved the chair," he said. The one from the corner. She'd moved it to face the window. "Better light for reading." "I've been putting it in the corner for 12 years. 12 years is long enough to try something different," she said. He looked at the chair in its new position and then looked at her, and the almost smile was all the way home now. She could see it plainly, see it for what it was. A man coming back from somewhere he had been a long time and finding that the place he was coming back to was better than what he'd left. 3 months after the night in the hospital, Evelyn Carter stood in the garden of a Moretti estate and watched her son discover grass. Marco had recently arrived at the developmental stage where everything in the world was an investigation requiring immediate physical contact, and grass had entered his awareness as a substance that required thorough examination by both hands and, periodically, the mouth. He sat in the garden bed in the afternoon light and worked through this investigation with complete absorption, while Isla, beside him, watched the proceedings with the particular expression of a person who had concluded that her brother's methods were inefficient but was willing to observe for research purposes. Evelyn watched them. She had a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She did not particularly care. The light on the garden in the afternoon in early spring had a quality she had not expected to find beautiful when she first came to this place. When she had been a woman arriving at a destination she hadn't chosen, exhausted and abandoned, and running on the biological imperative of keeping 2 small lives alive. She had not been looking at the garden then. She had been looking at exits, at angles, at the faces of people and what they contained. She still looked at those things. That had not changed. She did not think it would change, which was the specific evolution that months of this life had produced. Not innocence recovered, not naivety reinstalled, but a person who saw clearly and chose anyway, who made her accounting every day and arrived each day at the same conclusion, which was that she was where she intended to be. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps on the stone path from the house, the particular cadence she had learned without meaning to learn it, the way you learned the sounds of a place that had become home. He stopped beside her. He looked at Marco and Isla in the garden bed, and the expression on his face was the same one she'd seen for a fraction of a second in a hospital delivery room 6 months ago. Open, undefended, a man looking at something that had gotten through every wall he'd built, that had found its way into the place he'd spent the longest time protecting. It was not a fraction of a second anymore. It was the default now. He still had the other face, the controlled, calibrated face that the world of his business required, and that she did not ask him to give up because she understood what it protected and was not interested in leaving the people she loved unprotected. But here, in the garden, in the afternoon, with Marco conducting his investigation of grass and Isla observing with scientific detachment, here, the other face was simply absent. He reached down and picked up Marco, who accepted this with the democratic openness of a child who had identified multiple trustworthy people in his world and allocated his affection without hierarchy. Marco grabbed the lapel of Lucien's jacket and examined it with the same thoroughness he had given the grass, and Lucien held him with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this daily for 3 months, and whose body had adapted to it the way bodies adapted to things they did every day. Isla raised her arms. She was looking at Evelyn. Evelyn set down her cold coffee and picked up her daughter and held her against her shoulder and stood in the garden with the light on everything. She thought about the delivery room, the white clock with the red second hand, the door swinging closed behind a man who had made a choice that unmade their life, and then another door opening and a different man coming through it, and the specific chain of events that connected those 2 moments to this one. She thought about what she had been at the beginning of that chain, a woman in a hospital bed, abandoned, gripping a rail, counting intervals. What she had become at the end of it was not a woman who had been saved. That was the wrong word. That was the word for a story where someone else was the agent and you were the object. She had been present for every choice. She had walked into the security meeting and stood between her children and her husband, and made the assessment that determined what happened next. She had been the agent of her own survival and of theirs. What she had found along the way was not rescue. It was partnership, imperfect, complicated, built on a foundation that included things she would have previously considered disqualifying and which she had chosen to qualify differently because the man himself had earned that reconsideration by his actions rather than his words. He would remain who he was. She would remain who she was. The life they were building was not a simple life, and it was not a clean one, and there were aspects of it that she navigated with her eyes open in her accounting current. It was her life. She had chosen it. She was going to go on choosing it. "Cold coffee," he said. He'd seen the cup. "I got distracted," she said. "I'll have Kara make a fresh one." "In a minute," she said. "Stay here a minute." He stayed. Marco had found his collar now and was investigating its construction. Isla had her head against Evelyn's shoulder and was looking at the garden with those dark, watchful eyes that would probably still be watching everything carefully when she was 40. The light held. The afternoon held. The garden held them all in its quiet, ordinary, specific afternoon, which was not a dramatic moment, which was not a culmination, which was simply a Tuesday in early spring with cold coffee and grass-stained children and the accumulated weight of everything that had happened pressed down into something small enough to carry, light enough to live with. And Evelyn Carter breathed it in and held it and let it be exactly what it was, which was enough, which was, she had learned, almost always enough.